Thank you. Full disclosure, I'm not a politician. Boy, it's great to be a Muslim because you get to go last. Which means that others have come before you to warm up the room, and you get to simply stand on the shoulders of giants. Assalamu alaikum, shalom aleichem, peace and blessings be unto all of you. Namaskar, Shanti, Sastikali, and if I left anyone out, I'm sorry, that's all I know. Thank you again to the Niagara Foundation. Thank you, Reverend Deborah, for opening and unlocking the doors both to your heart and to your church being here. And I want to thank all the volunteers, and especially the cooks, for a really blessed meal. Probably like most of you, your first exposure to the word altruism was taking the SATs. Let's be honest now. And you learned it, and you thought you'd never have to use it again, like most of those words. I actually had a different experience. It was a word that really struck me. I was struck by the elegance of the word, and I was struck by its absence in my vocabulary before taking the SATs. And the last, I won't say how many years, since taking the SATs, it has been a journey of trying to understand this word, and understand it in all its complexities, all of its glories, all of its nuances. In the Islamic context, the word that approximates altruism is a word called itar. And although the standard SAT definition is concern for the welfare of others, I find that that definition is rather limiting. Because if anything, it seems just passive. You can be concerned. And in this world of ours today, the society where your level of engagement is really reduced to which hand to hold the remote control, I think it's important to recognize then that it is an active pursuit, and it has always been one that requires engagement. But what does altruism mean from an Islamic perspective? Well, the Prophet Muhammad speaks about this when he says that none of you truly believes until he loves for his brother what he loves for himself. And again, this is not something that is really new. My esteemed predecessors, both here on the podium as well as theologically, can attest to this. I think what happens, though, is what's more critical is understanding who's your brother. Because oftentimes this intrinsic sense of altruism, this almost reflexive empathy that one might feel to do something, is limited by our own prejudices, our own barriers that we then erect, as to say, well, who's eligible for my altruism? If one takes a look then at the earliest community in Islam, as it is reified in the year 622 when the Prophet Muhammad and this small and very beleaguered group of followers migrates to then the city of Yathrib, which becomes known as Medina, he encounters a very diverse community of people. Jewish tribes, pagans, and now this new group of marginalized, persecuted Muslims who have no place else to go. They are dislocated. And one of the first things that he constructs is a constitution. An agreement among the people to say that you have to be altruistic toward one another. And it is irrespective of what your classification was prior to this. When he arrives in Medina, Jews, pagans, Muslims are all beholden to one another. And you then are stripped of just these identity markers of saying, well, these are my limits. My altruism goes to my brother who happens to be my community member in a very limited sense. By no means will you attain righteousness unless you spend of that which you love, is a Quranic injunction. The understanding that we often have to sometimes give until it hurts is very much recognized that the test that is put to you by your Creator is to test you with that which you love the most. If it is money, you will be tested with this. If it is your knowledge, it will be tested with this. If it is your time and your energy, you will be tested with this. And the challenge is to see how freely you give of all of these bounties that have been given to you, because after all, your knowledge, your wealth, your time, and your energy are all given to you to hold in custody from your Maker. The best charity is that given when one is in need and struggling. And this speaks volumes in the current climate that we have. And I'm always struck as a child of the West, having grown up my entire life in the UK and the US, to find that at some of the bleaker moments, it is then that some of the people in the worst position tend to open their hearts and their wallets and their time and their energy more than others who really ought to be in that position to give so indiscriminately. Part of the issue, though, is the recognition that altruism sometimes needs to be legislated. There needs to be a divine nudge. And all religions have this. The concept of tithing. In Islam, it's the concept of zakat. It is one of the 5 pillars of Islam that you must give 1/40 of your assets on hand forward to those who are less fortunate for you. And the way that it is described in Islam is rather beautiful. It means it is a mechanism to cleanse your wealth. It creates then an ethos for altruism that extends not just for the monetary. There's this wonderful notion of being an entrepreneur. And entrepreneurs generally are considered to be those who work in the commercial or in the financial sectors of society. But there are social entrepreneurs, those who give freely, those who give shamelessly sometimes, effortlessly if one can, to then provide of themselves to the broader society. Well then, what about this dilemma about altruism seemingly being a selfless act, and the dangers that we have of being considered a selfish person? Is there really any act that can be considered fully selfless? And oftentimes people feel a sense of anxiety to even engage in altruism if they feel that it may be tainted with this notion of selfish. Am I really doing it for just the sake of doing it for somebody else? What's in it for me? And the answer to this, I think, is quite simple. There's an expectation and a promise of divine reward for altruism. That's why people who are driven, motivated by their faith, by their commitment to religion and to their relationship with their Creator, know that this relationship is there, that there is a spiritual benefit, a spiritual reward, if not in this life, then in the hereafter, that awaits them. But this selfishness has to be qualified, because it's a selfishness that is forged in the crucible of selflessness. Because the selfishness is only based on your relationship or your contract with your Creator. The act of altruism in which you are engaged to help your fellow brother or sister is the selflessness part. So one need not fear or have an anxiety that they are perhaps engaging in something hypocritical or contradictory or inconsistent when they reach out with their concern for others and act upon it. The selfishness is there. The reward, the incentive for that, the profit motive, is between you and your Creator. And that sanctifies then the selflessness that you can engage with freely and frequently with your fellow human being. And the reason why Islam recognizes this is because Islam provides a balance of relationships and contracts. There's a relationship between the individual and his or her Maker, and there's a relationship between the individual and the community. And both God and the community have a right over you. And so when one understands that this is not simply a vertical imperative between the individual and the Creator, that there's also a horizontal access between the individual and the community, this then helps understand the full complexity and clarity of altruism. The highest form of altruism, though, is when it becomes reflexive, when it becomes second nature, when people don't get out their calculators, or in the old days when we used to have them on our watches, to figure out what is the spiritual reward that awaits us. The highest form of altruism is when you reflexively act without a regard for what awaits you in your relationship with your Creator, but simply because it either pleases Him is the right thing to do. And as a result of that, we have to understand how it ties into compassion. True compassion doesn't react or depend upon your reaction to act reflexively. All too often, when we see an image that we have then an impulse to respond, we have constructed barriers as to what or who that person is in need and whether or not to engage with that person. True altruism is actually the reaction to the need itself, not what or who the person is. And so I'd like to leave you then with a request in this highly technological world of ours, that when it comes to altruism, the real solution is to turn off your Google alerts. Google alerts tend to be very reductive. They limit the scope of what you're interested in hearing about when it comes to news items. Now, I understand that we're all very busy, and there's a cacophony of voices that are out there that sometimes get lost in the static of information, but it also then reduces your ability to see the bigger picture of who all is in need. The people in need are your brothers and your sisters, and they are your brothers and sisters in humanity, irrespective of some of the barriers we place on it. Thank you.